Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What's It Worth. My name is Dave Ammerman, auction manager at Steiner Sports, and I've got an awesome show for you guys planned today. So you really want to make sure you're tuned in here. If you guys like what you're seeing, make sure you go on and share it. I've got with me right here the founder of JSA Authentication, Jimmy Spence. Jimmy, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Jimmy's a pioneer of this business, and without allowing me to introduce Jimmy to you guys, I want him to kind of get into a little bit about collectibles kind of on a personal level here, because Jimmy's been doing this probably longer than I've been alive and most people. So why don't you, I understand you grew up in North New Jersey. Take us back to how you got started with autographs. I mean, what drew you in? Kind of how'd you get your start?
Well, it really starts before I was even born. My grandfather and father both worked at Yankee Stadium. My grandfather was an usher. My father was a vendor. They both were collectors. My grandfather had a very large collection of autographs, and from the time as far back as I can remember, I've been collecting autographs. Started at a very young age. I'd either mail things off to people or actually go to different events where I'd see them, and I built myself quite a collection. I was just a collector at the time, but somewhere along the line it turned into a business.
Okay, so you would go out and you'd try to meet the athlete and get it signed. Who was your big score when you were doing that? Who'd you get?
Oh, well, when I was a kid, I lived in Englewood, New Jersey, and there were quite a few players for the New York Yankees that lived in the area. So I would go see Catfish Hunter. I'd see Gene Michael. Actually, I got tickets to go to a Yankee game back in 1970. He set me up on that. I actually went to Thurman Munson's house in Norwood, New Jersey one time.
Wow.
And
you got him?
No, you know what happened is my cousin said, hey, he lives right down the block from me. We really need to go down there. And headed down to his house. I had a ball in my hand, pen, and noticed the screen door was open. Or the screen door was closed. The main door of the house was open, and we ring the doorbell, and he saw that we were two autograph chasers, and he sicked his dog after us, and we went running down the block, so we never did get the autograph.
That's amazing. Well, the sacrifices autograph collector has to go through. I'm sure we've got a ton of guys on here that probably are doing the similar things right now. So, guys, today we're going to be focusing on Babe Ruth. We've got a special about Babe Ruth, and not only that, we have a few examples that Jimmy Spence here and myself we're going to run through, and he's going to give us some feedback on collecting Babe Ruth autographs. So we're going to look for pre-1927, all sorts of array. I even have 3 Babe Ruth autographs right here that we'll get into as well. But we're sitting here with Jimmy Spence, founder of JSA Authentication. We use JSA pretty much A to Z when it comes to the auction business, or when we get pieces third party that aren't signed. Steiner Sports, we're a pre-certified authentication company. So we'll hire Yogi Berra, we'll hire Odell Beckham Jr., we'll hire Steph Curry. They'll come in, they'll sign it, we'll put our name on it. But if you get something in person, like Jimmy was doing here, and you don't have an authentication on it, it's great to get a photo of the guy actually signing it. That obviously works well. But if you don't get that, which most people don't, JSA Authentication, we certainly trust their brand. Jimmy's been doing this for a long time. There are some competitors out there as well, but actually, if I'm not mistaken, you certainly helped found those companies as well. So if you don't mind taking it back a little bit here, just give me a little bit of professional background, because as an autograph authenticator, you obviously got to know what you're doing. So if you don't mind running through how you kind of got into the business and how that kind of led to where you're at now.
Okay. I actually graduated right here in this town. I went to Iona. I graduated in 1982 with, believe it or not, a French and an international business degree.
Okay.
But I was always a collector, and I always enjoyed that. And somewhere in my mid-20s, I decided that I'd try my hand at selling autographs. I was a weekend warrior, and I was going to many shows, in the local area, and eventually it was regional and then national. And I built myself a nice business. In fact, I was making more money on the weekends selling autographs than I was on my regular job. So
not to date you here, because the autograph scene, there was no internet. You had to go to these shows. I mean, what was the time period around when these shows started taking off? The hobby kind of really started to shape up from what you saw.
In the early 80s, it really started to take form, but I would say somewhere around 1985, 86, you noticed a big interest. There was a lot of card companies involved. Everybody was coming out with new product, and I noticed when I first started doing autographs at shows, I might be one of 3 vendors at a show that would actually carry autographs. Most of it was memorabilia, cards, and a lot of people were just kind of like, I'm not interested in autographs. And eventually it just built up. I mean, a lot of the guests that were coming, they were signing quite a few autographs, and it became very, very popular. And now it's hard to go to a convention, a card show, without seeing some autographed item on someone's table.
Okay, so you were a dealer, you're pretty much selling autographs, then how did that transition into authenticating?
Well, I was at the show, and a lot of people, I guess, realized that I knew what I was talking about. I actually studied this, and I got myself a certificate in forensic document examination, and people were very interested in what I had to say. I was asked to, in fact, my company in 1999, I was approached and sold my company to Collectors Universe, which was an IPO that started up.
Wow.
And I started PSA DNA, which is still in existence today, one of my competitors. And I'm very proud of building that up as I did. I was with them for 6 years. And some of the guys that I introduced to authenticating, they, after I left, they stayed with it, and then eventually some of them moved on to another company. So there's some competition along the way.
Out in this business
yeah,
right
I guess
now.
it has been that way. But you know what? It's all good. We're JSA is doing extremely well. We authenticate from more auction houses than anyone else out there, and we're quite busy. I think we've authenticated physically in 45 different states. Any given day, there's 150,000 autographs up on eBay that have our certification. We have people all over the country that come to these events, and we have sprinkled around the country people that are authenticating for us, and we're very selective in who we choose, and it's working out quite well.
Okay, so we pre-certify autographs. You authenticate autographs. You guys are the leader of the hobby. Can you just explain for the audience here what autograph authentication even is? What does that mean? Is it mean, there's no doubt this is real, or what in your best explanation would you describe autograph authenticating as?
More so than anything, especially with the JSA letter of authenticity, it makes the item marketable. Okay, we do our very best to get the right answer, and very few times, okay, have we been called out where it hasn't been right. I mean, we're human; it could happen. However, people want to know and buy with confidence and sell with confidence. In your case, they want to know what they have is valid and that it can go into a collection, and everybody can feel warm and cozy about it. And at some point, when the item sells again, it will remain marketable, so that letter of authenticity is the pedigree needed in order to move the item to the next collector.
Yeah, I often see collections from the late 80s, early 90s, a gentleman selling everything. He's 70 years old and everything's for sale. I go in and there are all these certifications from different companies, this baseball card shop, this one, that one. And oftentimes, a lot of those certifications aren't valid, really, and the autographs are known forgeries. I mean, was there a period in this hobby that's known for kind of being the bad child that put out a lot of pieces that weren't good? Or what are some indications of pieces that you guys see out there, or eras where things really aren't what they say? I mean, you guys are kind of policing the hobby here. So if you can explain some of that to our guys. So just because it has document doesn't necessarily mean, this is real. I mean, what type of things do you guys look for when you look at autographs?
Well, even just because it comes from what people consider a valuable source or a solid source, that doesn't mean. Sometimes things come from players' collections where maybe the wife or a bat boy had signed the item. So that was done non-maliciously. But when it gets to the point where the item started to have a tremendous value, when you get into the late 1980s, early 1990s, this was the wild, wild west. It was hog wild. People were just coming up with more elaborate stories than you and I can think of, and how the item got into their hands and how they're selling it. And unfortunately, there was just so much of that garbage out there, and there was no regulation. There was nobody that was creating any type of authentication. And what was out there, some people were creating letters of authenticity that they didn't even have any contact information on it. There was no, at the time, there was no email addresses or websites, but there was not even a phone number or a fax number.
Nothing to put the cert with that item either.
Oh, it's terrible.
They could have just printed a cert and someone could swap that as well. So, I mean, you guys at least photographed the item, you hologram either the cert card if it's expensive piece. And then you guys have the documentation as well. I'm Dave Ammerman, host. You're watching What's It Worth? Guys, I want you to interact. I've got Jimmy Spence here. We want to see your best Babe Ruth item that you guys have or that you can find. We're going to give the winner $50 credit to your next purchase at Steiner Sports. So if you guys have a Babe Ruth item, we want to see it. We're going to judge after the fact. We always get a lot of comments, but whoever can come up with the best Babe Ruth item that they own, or at least a friend owns, or they know someone that owns, there has to be some sort of relation to you in that product. Whoever can come up with the best legitimate Babe Ruth item right now on our comments, we're going to give a $50 credit to your Steiner account. And if you're not a Steiner Sports customer and you're opening a new account, buying for the first time, we're going to put $100 on that account if, in fact, you guys provide a Babe Ruth autograph that's legitimate, that either you own or a family member or someone very close by owns. Post in the comments right now. I'm here with Jimmy Spence at JSA Authentication. We actually got something right now we're going to do that I'm sure Jimmy just doesn't do for anybody. We have a few samples of Babe Ruth autographs. We have 3 right now that we're going to run through for you so you guys can help kind of see the differences in Babe Ruth autographs over time. And obviously Jimmy knows Babe Ruth autographs better than anyone. So right now I have a few examples. We're going to put them up on the screen. The first example here is an earlier era Babe Ruth, and it has some quotes. So Jimmy, if you don't mind, do you mind explaining to us what we're looking at here on this first picture, this Babe Ruth autograph?
Well, the copy of that Babe Ruth, it's certainly a pre-1928 version. The signature is much more streamlined than the ones in his later life. And he used quotation marks, so that's how I really know that it's before 28, because he very rarely would use quotation marks after that time frame. It was just, an extra ink on the pen that he was just avoiding because his signature became so popular that he could avoid using that. And everybody knew him as Babe and not as his real name George, which he virtually stopped using or signing his name George in the around 1919, 1920, unless it was for some type of contractual or legal document.
Okay. So I understand George Herman Ruth got the nickname Babe Ruth actually at a training camp in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So he's been called Babe Ruth. So when did you start seeing the word Babe in quotes come up on Ruth? Was it 1915? Do you think it was later on, 1917? Is there a rough time when we started seeing even the word Babe being signed as opposed to George?
Well, we have a very large comprehensive exemplar file, and it's all in chronological order. And I would say the earliest examples I've seen were around 1918, where he actually used to use it sparingly. And then by 1920, it was Babe for the most part.
It was in quotes. All right. So right there you have a early pre-1927, would you say, when you stopped using the quotes?
I would say right after the barnstorming after 1927, going into 1928, I would see him release those quotation marks. It really wasn't used much after that. 1928 on baseballs, you really don't see it. Sometimes what happens is the clubhouse manager would actually put in the quotation marks, but even he abandoned it after a while.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. So that's the autograph we're looking at right here. We've got a second example, a little bit different of a Ruth autograph here. Jimmy, what can you tell me about this Babe Ruth autograph?
Well, the first thing you notice is the size. Okay, it's much larger than the other, and there's no quotation marks, and there's much greater speed to the autograph as well. I mean, he had signed thousands and thousands of autographs. I mean, did he ever deny someone of his autograph?
Right.
I mean, I heard stories from old timers years ago that used to tell me that the cab drivers used to get upset with him because he was signing for so many kids outside the stadium.
Couldn't drive away.
And the cab wanted to go, and meanwhile the meter's ticking, and he's still signing. I got a few more to sign in. Back then it was different than now. Somebody was happy that they got one autograph. They didn't have to beat up the guy for 7. What they call racking them today.
Yeah.
How the expression. So they were happy to get one, but it was such a contagious item to have. I mean, everybody wanted it.
Now, I've seen some photographs, and I don't know how true this is, but there's some speculation that maybe Babe Ruth only signed on the side panel. Now, obviously, we see Sweet Spot authenticated Babe Ruth autographs. There's some photos of him signing a room full of balls where he's on the side panel the whole time, but then I've actually seen the opposite on the Sweet Spot. So is there any truth to that at all, or what are your thoughts on Babe's signature placement on the ball?
Well, as his popularity grew especially from, let's say, 1923 when they won their first World Series. He was signing the sweet spot. Now, that is typically reserved for the manager. Today, you always see that on a team sign ball. Usually the manager signs it. But Babe that was his spot. In fact, try and find a Lou Gehrig autograph on a baseball on the sweet spot that was signed prior to Babe leaving the team in 1934. He would always, defer to the side panel and let Babe sign the sweet. Even if Babe wasn't on the ball yet, he just recognized that was his place. And then as soon as Babe left the team in 1935, you start to see Lou Gehrig's signature on the sweet spot, not usually as big as Babe's was. In fact, very often he'd leave a spot for somebody else to sign it, above him.
Or somebody, sure.
Yeah, so he just didn't have that same that ego, perhaps, that Babe did, but Babe was more than accommodating. And there are balls that are signed on the sweet spot, on the side panel by Babe Ruth, but there's just not as many as that sweet spot.
All right, so you guys are watching What's It Worth. I've got Jimmy Spence here. We're waiting for your comments to see the best Babe Ruth. We're going to give away some money, whoever can post the best Babe Ruth. Guys, this is still What's It Worth, so you can definitely post your items if you're looking for the value on them, because that's what we're here for. We want to see a bunch of items. If you guys have questions, now is the time. Send us the comments, so here in a few, we can look through them. We can get you values on pieces you might have had sitting in the closet for a long time. If you have a collection that you're looking to get appraised or something, we'll put my email in the comments as well. You can certainly email me. Take advantage of this time here. We've got about 30 minutes to answer questions. I get emails all week. How much is this worth? How much is that worth? I'll be honest with you. If somebody emails me a $150 photo and says, how much is this worth? No offense to everyone. I want to get back to everyone, but now's the time to do it, because I may not get back to you. If you miss me here and you can't connect on the email, please, next week, if you have something, share it again. We'll try to get back to you. We've got one more Babe Ruth autograph we want to look at here. This Babe Ruth autograph is a little different than the other two. So I just wanted to get your take here on this this final Babe Ruth here.
Ouch. That one hurts my eyes. Actually, that's, an outright forgery. Babe never signed anything that looked like that. It's amateur hours. Somebody that did that had not practiced his signature. There are far better practitioners out there. There's far better forgers than that.
Now, are there certain things to look for on a Babe Ruth that kind of catches your eye to say, okay, this is no good? Is it the way the E goes? Is it things with the B? Is it speed? What are some things that you look for in a Ruth that you can pretty much tell right away, I don't like?
Well, the sizing, number one, it's off. I mean, some of the letters are exaggerated. The bottom of the B is way too large. The top of the B is too small. The way it's leaning over, the angle of it is wrong. But the baseline is probably the first thing I saw.
Usually pretty level.
Usually you could draw a ruler right underneath Babe Ruth's autograph, as with many of the players from his era. In this, it's skipping, it's undulating, it's up and down, and that shows that this person didn't have very much time to practice, or they'll just never be a very good forger.
That is amazing information right there. If you guys are listening, Jimmy Spence here giving away some really great Babe Ruth tips. If you guys are out there looking for a Babe Ruth ball, wherever it may be, and it's not authenticated, that right there is some amazing things to look for. The straightness along the bottom, the sizing of the letters, and just please tune in if you guys want to get some great information on buying right here on What's It Worth. I've got a few pieces that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about some values, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. This first ball here, actually, while I'm sitting here, I've realized a little bit more than I even knew about this ball myself. This ball it's signed by Babe Ruth, and it's dated 1927.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dated and inscribed there. What a wonderful ball. A lot of times when he'd inscribe a ball, he would sign it on the side panel because, that's...
You have to fit it.
There's more room for him to write the inscription. It's very tough to do that if it was just on the sweet spot. He even dated it, which is very nice. Perfect flow. The aging of the ink, you could see it's there. I mean, it's not perfectly bold like it was signed yesterday, but it's aged very well, compared to, it's almost 100 years old, actually.
So a Babe Ruth ball signed on the side panel, single sign ball, depending on the level of the clarity of the signature and the overall appeal of the ball. On a single sign baseball, on something like this, you're probably going to be in the $7,500 range. I've seen $15,000 on things in eights and whatnot, but the inscription will definitely take a little value away. Now, the difference between this ball and a normal side panel Babe Ruth baseball, it actually has a second signature, and the second signature is Joe Brown. Now, luckily, it's only 2 signatures. What I notice is when you have 4, 5, 6, and they're kind of unrelated, it kind of keeps detracting from the value of the baseball. When you have a dual signed ball, sometimes that can maintain value, not quite like a single, but it keeps a little bit more so of the value there. But I actually didn't know much about Joe Brown, and Jimmy here had some great information about Joe Brown. So what can you tell us about him?
Well, he was a very popular Hollywood actor. Joe Brown was also the co-owner, part-to-part owner in minor league clubs. So he had a strong attachment to baseball. He was a big fan. Joey Brown was, if you could look him up, I guess on the internet, but he's the fellow that had a very wide smile and a very wide mouth. His corner of his mouth started on the side, so he's very recognizable. Matter of fact, Joey Brown's son, Joe L. Brown, was the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates in their winning season, their World Championship season in 1960. And I had the pleasure of meeting him at an All-Star Fan Fest back in the 90s out in Pittsburgh, and he was a very nice man. He since then has passed, but it's a nice connection, between that and I think the ball. I think you're undervaluing this one, considering that it is dated 1927. Sure. That is the year the greatest team of all time, existed in the 27 Murderers Row.
There you go. So, guys, this is going to be available at SteinerAuctions.com. If you check it out, it's not up live right now. It'll be in our next catalog auction. But we will have this Babe Ruth available in auction shortly. Now, I've got a really unique piece right here, World Series program signed by Ruth. There is another signature on the program as well, but I've noticed when Babe Ruth signs on a World Series program, it usually carries a premium in value. I mean, do you see that to be true?
Well, his career was over. I mean, he was desperately hunting for a manager's job at the time. Yeah. This year, he was invited certainly to many of these events. This particular one was local for him because he lived in Riverdale at the time. So, for him to go to either the Yankees or the Giants, they were right across the river from each other. It was not a big commute for him to get there. He signed it beautifully, and it's a really nice contrast. He signed it on the light area. I can't say the same for the pencil signature of George Raft, and George Raft was an actor, a very popular actor himself, back during that time in a lot of gangster films. But Babe did a beautiful job. Notice the quotation marks are not on his signature, and that's perfect sizing, perfect flow, perfect angle, perfect formation for what you'd expect in a Babe Ruth autograph from that time frame.
Now, a lot of our viewers are probably interested in perhaps getting autographs graded. Now, you have a specific stance on getting a number grade on a baseball, or at least you aren't currently doing that now. Is there any particular reason? Do you think you'll go to that in the future? What's the reasoning that JSA is not number grading autographs?
Well, I've actually held back from. I know my competitors do it quite a bit, but I've never been fond of it. I always thought that, if you take a baseball and you grade it a 10 and somebody puts it on their windowsill and you come back 3 weeks later, it's going to be an 8. Yeah. And I've always been concerned about that. And a lot of people that buy this memorabilia, they want to display it. They want to show it off. They're not all putting it in a safe where it's never going to see the light of day. So unfortunately, that happens. And most of my competitors have that disclaimer saying, the grade is good for this day, and not tomorrow. So
but you'll see one pop up graded an 8 or 9, and he looks like a 5.
Hopefully it wasn't misgraded to begin with.
Right,
but it does drive the market. A lot of people like to own those items that are graded a 10 or something close to it. So it's part of our industry, and I understand that. I get it. But I suppose we'll be getting involved in that, especially when our encapsulation comes up.
Okay. Any timetable on the
encapsulation? That's a couple of months away. I mean, We've got all the machinery, everything's in place. We're just working out a few kinks, and I'm very excited about it. We got a lot of time into it.
Guys, look out for JSA encapsulation. I mean, that's big. So cards, ticket stubs, index cards, pretty much.
The whole gamut.
Photos.
Well, we'll start off small, and eventually you'll see all of them come about. But I'm interested in getting things turned around at a much faster clip than I'm finding people complaining about. And I think everybody's going to be very happy with the slab itself, the flip. It's all modernized, and it's going to be a big splash. In fact, I might not even advertise it from the get-go, because I'm afraid, I have to make sure that I can do the production end of it.
Sure.
I know the sales end of it. I can do that.
Yeah,
it's the production.
All right, so we have one more piece here, and then we're going to get to your guys' questions. If you have an item you're wondering what it's worth, please post right now, and we're going to get to it in just a few minutes. Lastly, we have a really unique piece here. This is a Babe Ruth story. This was recently brought to us, and I noticed that this is the original printing. Now, I noticed this is a 10 grade, obviously, if everything checks out here, but I noticed the signature looked a little bit off to me. So, with this book and this particular autograph, what are your opinions here?
Well, there's a big inscription on it, but unfortunately, this was signed right at the end of his life. This is in April, and at that time, he was under a lot of nurse care. In fact, he had round-the-clock nurse care because he was dying of cancer. He was dying of throat cancer. And many of these nurses that were there, if it wasn't his wife Claire, were taking the liberty of accommodating a lot of the autograph requests that were coming in. I mean, everybody knew it didn't look good for Babe. I mean, he appeared at the stadium in '47, and he wasn't looking good. He was only 53 years old, but he looked like he was in his 80s or worse. It just, unfortunately, this one here was penned by somebody secretarially for him at the end of the line there for him. Now, I will say that this particular book, which was published the last year of his life, there are quite a few valid examples out there. The most of them are just signed Babe Ruth, though. I don't see the whole inscription. But I guess the nurses... Did you see
a lot of inscriptions from Babe Ruth, really? Are there
many. But at the end of his life, I'm sure he was hurting. And, his signature never really faltered. I mean, I expect maybe the last couple of months of his life when it really got bad. In fact, I saw adjustments to his last will where even the initials were signed backwards sometimes. It was HGR he was writing on, and it was really a shame because you could see that he wasn't all there when he was signing it. But unfortunately, this particular piece, although it's a nice piece of memorabilia, the autograph is valueless because it's not a.
So on this book right here, this is the original first edition Babe Ruth. So with this type of signature, if someone might be thinking this is a $10,000, $15,000 copy, however, with that secretarial version, certainly probably at best maybe a few $100s, unfortunately.
Right.
But the autograph copies, they're I've seen them go for $8,500.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're up there. The movie had come out, and he was alive to see himself in the he unfortunately was played by William Bendix, who I think was miscast for the part, and William Bendix was a righty who they had to convert into a lefty, and it was very awkward for him to throw, and he wasn't a very athletic guy either. He was just a big guy, so I figured they'd fit the bill. But Babe, from what I understand, walked off the set in disgust because it made him kind of look like a buffoon. And unfortunately, that's, at the end of his life, after he had been through so much, not getting a job in Major League Baseball after his career outside of coaching for the Dodgers, it really wasn't a great moment for him.
Well, you guys, we're joined here by Jimmy Spence, founder of JSA Authentication. Jimmy, how can somebody go about sending an item to get authenticated by you guys? We take send-ins all the time, and these guys are up here about once a month. But if they weren't going to consign the piece or get us to authenticate it, how do they go about getting a piece authenticated by you guys?
Well, it's quite easy. If you went on to SpenceLOA.com, our website tells you where we're going to be, and it has lists of events and appearances all over the country. We're in, like I said before, we're in 45 different states authenticating. Any given weekend, JSA is in 7 different cities, so it's easy enough to find us. However, if you don't want to take the time to go to a show or a convention, or you maybe require a house call from us, you could actually come to one of our offices. We have one in Parsippany, New Jersey, and one down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So we're out there. So if you have memorabilia and you want to get it authenticated, by all means, it's very simple, whether it be mail or coming to visit us in person.
All right. So, guys, that's how you can get your items authenticated. You can send it to us. If you reach out to us on the consign page or just the What's It Worth tab and you send us the item, if you send us some images, we can certainly help you get it authenticated, or you can reach out to JSA Direct prior to reaching out to us if you're definitely interested in selling it. They can authenticate the item as well. We only sell items with third-party authentication or with our authentications or some sort of authentication. So we'll take the items non-authenticated, but before we're able to sell it, that's how strict this market's become, and that's how we want the items to come to our clients. Every item that we sell is going to have a letter. So guys, I hope you guys are posting the Babe Ruth items because I'm curious to look at them, and also I'd love to help you guys figure out how much your items are worth. So why don't we answer a few questions while we got time?
Well, while we're on the topic of famous Yankees sluggers, Josh asks about his single signed baseball signed by Roger Maris. It does have JSA authentication.
All right. Well, there's a range on Maris I've certainly seen. We just recently sold one. It was a side panel. It was kind of faded, maybe like a 5 or 6 autograph. So, it really depends on the baseball here. A perfect sweet spot signed Maris ball, I've seen them getting up there. I've seen 7,500 almost. I've seen almost 10,000 for Maris now. I remember you pay 1,000, 2,000, you were kind of paying a lot for Maris, but he's certainly more rare than Mickey Mantle. But again, it depends on the condition, so we'd love to see it. I hate to tell you it's worth 7,500, and we look at it and it's really faded and it's worth 800. So there's such a huge range on the value of Maris there. But why is Maris worth more than Mickey Mantle?
Well, he died 10 years earlier. He died in 1985. It was tragic. He died, of cancer. As far as the value is concerned, it has a lot to do with the ball that it's signed on. I mean, if it's signed on, a more current ball towards the end of his life, it's not going to be worth as much as if it was signed on a Joe Cronin ball from his playing days. People look for that.
You see a lot of those out there? I really rarely see those. Single sign?
They're out there, but not certainly. You know what? There's a lot more Babe Ruths out there than there are Roger Marises, and he lived. He died in 1948, Ruth. So you see Maris more on team signed balls. He wasn't the kind of guy that was going to the shows like you see today, where they're signing 500, 600 at a clip. In a sitting.
You never ran into Maris doing any shows at all?
No, it was kind of early. He did some private signings early on, but there were some promotional times when he would sit down and sign autographs for the fans, but it never was a commercial sense like perhaps you folks do when you're sitting with an athlete and he signs 1,000 at a sitting. It wasn't a situation like that.
I've seen some Mantle Maris dual signed bats that look like it was from some sort of edition.
Correct.
What do you know about those dual signed bats?
Those were actually taken down to Florida, where he lived down in the Gainesville area at a Anheuser-Busch dealership down there, and he would accommodate some of those signings. They did also have some photographs as well, but again, it wasn't for the public. If it was for some entrepreneur that came down there with those bats that were specifically made.
Do you know how many of those are out there, or roughly what's supposed to be the number?
You know what? I don't think the person, in fact, the person that held that signing is deceased now, and I think he was very close to the vest on how many, that actually got sold. He didn't want to, let loose of that information.
Okay. So basically, when it comes down to a Roger Maris signed ball, a Roger Maris signed item, it depends on what kind of ball. Do we have any information on the ball? Do we have signature strength? If not, send us an image. We'll get back to you off air. Or if you have a chance next week, send us a picture of the ball. We'll try to get you down to nearest couple dollars if we can. We have examples. I saw a light one sell for $1,200. I've seen them go for $1,500. It's across the board, really. I've seen a Babe Ruth go for $800. That's light. So I can't really throw a number.
What color ink?
He did say that it was signed in 1959.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so he wasn't even with the Yankees at that time. He was.
I wonder if it's a single from '59, though. I mean, are there people on the ball, or is he saying it's a single signed baseball? Because
he was with Kansas City at the time, and he was a decent player, but he wasn't banging out 61 home runs at the time.
2 years later.
Yeah.
Right. All right, let's take a few more.
Here's an interesting one from Nick. He said, my father-in-law has 2 letters written, most likely dictated by his wife, from Shoeless Joe Jackson to his stepfather-in-law, written in 1927 and 1948. He was told that the 2 were roommates during spring training one year and became lifelong friends. The letters are signed by Jackson, but more than likely by his wife. While the previously mentioned letters are most likely signed by his wife, is there any value to them?
Kate Jackson is one of the few wives that actually carries value. You know, there's certain most of the times wives are signing for the athletes. No, that does not have any value. But because people can't afford a Joe Jackson autograph, what's the next best thing is having that version that was signed by his wife. Now, some people would say that Joe Jackson couldn't sign his name. He absolutely could, but it was very scratchy and very, very slow and deliberate. His wife was able to
write letters.
She was able to do that for him. And I've seen, pieces of paper where he actually was able to cipher numbers too. So he was able to do that. And I actually own a mortgage document signed by Joe Jackson, which is a really, really cool piece. No, you guys aren't getting it for the auction.
There's some great pieces in that collection. Well, we'll see. Well, you never know. But so what type of value? I haven't seen a lot of Joe Jackson wife documents. I mean, I've seen a few secretarial Jackson signatures, and maybe the people asking $300 or so. I mean, is that
that's a fair range on what she would sell for on, say, a government postcard? In an auction, and full disclosure, saying that it is her signature as opposed to his, and it'll still go for about $300.
So a letter with if some baseball content or some great content, that's important, especially in the 20s. There was a lot going on with Joe Jackson, the White Sox players. So if there's some baseball content, I would say probably a premium on that one, maybe worth even twice as much. Maybe if it's really good content, maybe it's more than $1,000. But you're about a $300 autograph on Mrs. Joe Jackson, and then depending on the content, it could probably just go up from there. Why don't we take two more?
Well, while we're on the theme of the White Sox, Scott asked, is there value to 1920 White Sox game programs? One is against the Yankees and one is against the Red Sox.
There is definitely value to the programs from all generations. We've been able to sell Yankee programs from the 50s just because Mickey Mantle's name is in there in a number 6 or something like that. You might be able to get a few $100s if it's a home run program with Mantle. So I think the owner of the programs has to do a little bit more research, figure out what game it's from, try to find what connection that has to do with today and what makes that so great of a program. You don't see the 20s programs out there as much, so they're definitely a few $100s. And depending on what happened in that game, is it a Ruth homer? That might be a $400 or $500 program. But it really just depends on what specific events happened during that game. Could make it a big difference. If it's Mickey Mantle's debut, that's going to have such a premium over a second or third game. So really, again, there's a lot going on in the 20s in baseball, so I'm sure that we can probably pinpoint maybe a Hall of Fame start. I'm sure several Hall of Famers were in the lineup. Did they get hits? Did they get home runs? Try to do a little more homework and see what exactly is going on there. But either way, I think you have a few $100 program there. Guys, you're watching What's It Worth? My name is Dave Ammerman, auction manager at Steiner Sports. I've got Jimmy Spence, owner of JSA Authentication here. We're taking your questions live on Facebook. We're going to have time for one more question. And then, guys, please continue to chime in all week long if you have chance. Every Thursday at 1:30, we show this show live on Facebook. So please tune in every week if you can. Share the video with as many people as you'd like. And hopefully we're adding some knowledge here because we've got, I don't know, between the two of us, maybe 70, 80 years in the hobby. Not dating anyone here, but I'll account for probably collecting since 91, so I'll take 27 years of that. But let's take one more question. And guys, also, we're doing a contest. Post, and we'll do it all week long, so that even if you're listening to this after we're live, post the best Babe Ruth item that you have in your collection or of someone that you know, and we're going to give a $50 credit to your Steiner Sports account if you're a member. And if you're not and you've never bought from Steiner and you win the contest, we're going to give you $100. So we'll take one more question, and then we'll be back to you guys next week. What do we got?
Our final question is from Joseph. He is saying, what is the value and condition of this ball signed by Honus Wagner? Here's a picture.
Okay, so Joseph actually emailed me this ball, and I apologize, Joseph, on the air here that I have not yet gotten back to you, but I mean, it's a very bold signature, but I will certainly let Jimmy weigh in on that baseball. Are you able to see that, Jim?
I can see it from across the room without binoculars, but it appears that there are other signatures on it. It's a very bold signature. Might even have some shellac over that panel. I don't know if it's on the other ones, but it's a shame that Wagner just didn't sign it, and then the collector, went home with it. But he ended up getting other signatures on it, which would devalue it.
Do you like the Wagner there?
Oh
on the
yeah,
sweet spot? It
this
looks
is
good.
when this is during his coaching days with the Pirates, most likely. You could tell just by the formation, and it's struggling, and the way the letters are kind of overlapping each other. But it's most likely a Pirates ball. I'm going to guess probably from the 1940s. And I can't see the other signatures on it, but I can see the hints of portions of them on the sides. Those type of balls, are out there. We authenticate them quite often, but Wagner being a nice display, you're looking at at least a couple of $1,000s for something like that, and it probably could be more if I knew more about the ball. What's on the flip side of it, the labeling, and maybe there's another gem of an autograph. Maybe there's an Archie Vaughan on the side.
Well, even Bing Crosby I've seen on Pirates.
Exactly.
He was a part owner at the
There you
team
go.
there, so and that's a bold signature. So I mean that's it displays not quite as a single because you can see the others, but the others look like they're in great shape too. I'd love to see all the panels. Please shoot us some more images of all the panels when we get off the air. Shoot it here right in the comments, and we'll take a look and kind of get you a real range and value there. But I would definitely say a few $1,000s as well. I mean, you have a bold signature on the sweet spot. It's not going anywhere, definitely in the later days there. But again, thank you for sharing your items, guys, here on What's It Worth. Every week, we're streaming live on Facebook. My name is Dave Amron, auction manager at Steiner Sports, here with Jimmy Spence, founder of JSA. We'll see you guys next week.